You may wonder, what even is fiscal policy? Fiscal policy is the use of government spending and taxation to influence a country's economic activity. There are usually two general approaches to fiscal policy. The first is expansionary fiscal policy, and the second is contractionary fiscal policy. There are several other types of fiscal policy, including mixed, counter-cyclical, Keynesian, and many more. But generally, fiscal policy is usually utilized to find economic equilibrium.
Fiscal policy involves three major components: President, or the executive branch, Congress, the legislative branch, and the Treasury. Does anyone know what the Treasury is? What branch the Treasury is? What's that? That's right, the executive branch again. The president kind of steers the ship in a sense. They set a general tone and intention for the priorities of the government under them, as well as proposing a budget. The president can push specific tax agendas and stimulus measures, and also signs and vetoes budgets and tax bills passed by Congress.
Congress is the main player in controlling fiscal policy. Congress has what is called the power of the purse. Only Congress can raise or lower taxes, and only Congress can approve government spending. The House Ways and Means Committee handles tax policy, and the Senate Finance Committee also oversees tax legislation. The House and Senate Budget Committees set budget targets and frameworks, and the Appropriations Committees decide how much money each government agency and program gets.
The Treasury carries out the policy decisions set. They do this by doing things like overseeing the collection of taxes, paying bills, etc. The Treasury also issues debt to fund deficits through Treasury bonds and securities. Now that we've gone over the types, components, and definition of fiscal policy, let's look at some examples of how certain events, good and bad, would affect the economy, and how fiscal policy comes into play.
Breaking news: California gets hit by a tsunami. Immediately after, the fresh water supply is contaminated. The U.S. Congress would likely implement the use of expansionary fiscal policy. In the short term, this would mean an issuance of emergency aid, first responders, as well as the National Guard. Another short-term form of aid they may offer is disaster relief. This is a small sum of money issued to a population in order to allow people to get back to their feet and, more importantly, to restore the economy. In the long term, there will be all sorts of cleanup and rebuilding projects. This includes infrastructure funding, potential tax cuts for those who suffered losses, and stimulus checks in order to further progress the economic recovery. Now, before we move into a live interaction between the three main parties involved in fiscal policy, let's recap what we've talked about for a refresher. So far, we've covered the definition of fiscal policy, which is the government's way of aiding or taxing the economy to promote its stability. We've also covered the most common types of fiscal policy, which are expansionary and contractionary, or supplementing and taxing. And lastly, we've just discussed two examples of how fiscal policy comes into play in different economic situations. Before our representatives come on the air, here's a little background information. A committee consisting of one tax-paying citizen, a member of Congress, and a member of the U.S. Treasury have assembled to discuss a recent disaster and how it will affect the economy. After a large fire in California, the city appointed these three to cover the issues from different perspectives to try and reach an understanding. Let's tune in now and hear what they have to say.
As a representing member of Congress, I want to start by recognizing this tragedy in California. We need to act fast to help those affected, but we must also keep an eye on our budget. How can we quickly get money for relief while still keeping our long-term finances stable?
Thank you for addressing this. I speak for the citizens, and I've seen that people who have lost homes and jobs need immediate help. That's shelter, medical care, and rebuilding support. We're worried about extra taxes or fees in the future, so we need clear policies that use the funds wisely without hurting our daily lives.
I understand both sides. I represent the U.S. Treasury, and our goal is to get enough funds quickly for disaster relief without harming the overall economy. One idea is to put small, focused fees on non-essential spending to pay for the emergency work. Instead of raising taxes for everyone, That way, we can keep costs down and still get funding to the areas that need it.
That sounds promising, but I'm concerned about delays. Can you ensure that the funds will reach the affected areas quickly? We can't afford long waits when lives and homes are at stake.
That's a fair point. We could set up an emergency fund that moves fast, supported by these focused fees. We'd also include checks to make sure the money is used correctly. Treasury, is this possible with our current system? We need to be sure that once this plan is in motion, there won't be unnecessary delays or roadblocks. Speed and accountability have to go hand in hand if we're going to truly help the people in time.
It's not easy, but we can work on a plan for quick fund distribution. We might use short-term bonds or tap into reserves. Along with small fees on non-essential spending, our aim is to help those in need without adding extra strain on most citizens. We'll also coordinate closely with state officials to speed up delivery of aid. Time is critical, and we'll prioritize getting funds where they're needed most while keeping the economy stable.
I appreciate that. We need a clear plan that gets money to those affected right away and keeps everyone informed about how it's spent. People have already lost so much, and delays will only make things worse. Quick action and open updates will ease a lot of fear and uncertainty. Knowing where the money is going and seeing real help in our communities will give people hope and show that we're not being forgotten.
By keeping the public involved and informed at every step, we can build trust and show that our focus is truly on helping communities recover and rebuild stronger.
To sum up, we're looking at a balanced approach. Quick emergency funds for California, supported by small, targeted fees. This should help in the crisis and keep our overall finances in order. The goal is to act fast without creating long-term burdens. By focusing these fees on non-essential spending, we avoid placing extra pressure on families already struggling. At the same time, this strategy helps maintain our financial health as we manage recovery efforts.
I'm glad we're talking about this. The people affected by the fire deserve clear answers and quick help. I look forward to seeing the plan work and staying updated on its progress.
As our representatives bring their conversation to a close, we can now clearly see the relationships between the different roles involved in fiscal policy. They managed to reach an agreement while still looking out for the needs and requirements of the groups they each represent. Something of note is that the US government is already supposed to represent the people, but when you have an inside perspective, it gives a better scope of the issue. Fiscal policy is a useful tactic that's helped to maintain balance in the economy, for all that affect it and for all that it affects.
That was an example of how fiscal policy would come into place in an event that would negatively impact the economy. Let's look at how fiscal policy works in the event of a positive impact to the economy. Does anyone know what the government would do if we found a huge amount of previously undiscovered natural resources on our own land, or some kind of technological advancement was discovered that would bring widespread prosperity to the economy? No, silly, the government would never intentionally suppress a discovery or technological advancement like this in order to maintain an artificial scarcity that enables mass exploitation. That's a conspiracy theory. Here's an example of what the government is supposed to do in a situation that looks like this. This just in, a biotech research facility in Houston, Texas has just made a breakthrough discovery in medical technology. They share the technology with the rest of the United States, and the hospitals around the nation are able to give much better care. As we know, one of the best ways for the economy to grow is through technological advancements. Fiscal policy can significantly influence technological advancements by funding education and research and encouraging companies to invest in innovations through tax incentives and subsidies. Fiscal incentives, such as research and development tax credits, can make it more attractive for firms to allocate resources towards innovation.
Here, we're going to break down two real-world historical examples of implementation of fiscal policy. First, we'll break down the US tech boom in the 90s. Does anyone know about the 90s US tech boom?
The US tech boom in the 90s came with the rise of the internet and the technology sector, which spurred economic growth. Innovation and investment in tech created jobs and increased productivity massively. Here's how it all happened.
In the early 1990s, key players like Bill Gates with Microsoft, Steve Jobs with Apple, and Mark with Netscape all drove technological breakthroughs. Their products created the foundation for the digital economy, sparking demand from consumers and businesses.
In the mid-1990s, Congress lays the groundwork with deregulation in the form of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which deregulated telecom markets, encouraged competition, and investment in internet infrastructure. Congress also kept internet commerce largely tax-free via early policies.
Congress's actions made it cheaper and faster to build the internet's backbone, enabling tech companies to scale. Venture capital flowed into startups. Congress worked with the president to align on a pro-growth, light regulation approach, which was a direct response to the tech sector's momentum.
From 1993 to 2000, President Clinton began to really champion a balanced fiscal approach, which balanced federal budgets while supporting the tech sector. He signed the 1993 Budget Act, which raised taxes on the wealthy and cut spending, which led to budget surplus by 1998. He also supported R&D tax credits and other forms of funding for scientific development.
These budget surpluses stabilized the economy and kept interest rates low while freeing up capital for private investment in tech. The R&D incentives directly benefited innovation. Clinton and Congress collaborated to work on fiscal discipline, and he also collaborated with tech leaders to promote the industry.
So, what happens when fiscal policy is not used effectively and in the hands of irresponsible leaders? The world faced an economic collapse, which mostly affected the housing market in the United States. Financial institutions gave out a ton of risky loans, particularly to people who couldn't afford to pay them back. These were called subprime mortgages. Banks then bundled the loans into financial products and sold them to investors across the globe.
Now, when the housing market bubble popped, people could not pay back their loans. Banks started failing, and what happens next? The whole financial system began to collapse. Now you might be asking, what does fiscal policy have to do with all of this?
Since fiscal policy is generally about government spending and taxation, government had to step in and use these tools to stop the economy from collapsing when the financial crisis hit in 2008.
President Obama's administration created the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or ARRA, in 2009. This was a massive $787 billion stimulus package aimed at jumpstarting the economy. The goal was to get people back to work and boost economic activity. How? Well, the package included big government spending on infrastructure like roads and schools, tax rebates for households, to encourage spending and aid state governments to prevent layoffs of teachers and first responders. On top of that, unemployment benefits were extended to help people who'd lost their jobs.
But it wasn't just about spending money. The government also had to step in to save the banks. TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, which gave $700 billion to buy up the toxic assets that were causing the banks to fail. This helped prevent a complete collapse of the financial system and kept credit flowing in the economy.
In addition to the spending programs, the government slashed taxes to give businesses and households more money to spend and invest. The government also created public sector jobs such as road work, construction projects, and community service to get back to work quickly.
Now, how did all of this turn out? Well, the good news is that the economy did start to recover. The stimulus checks helped stabilize things, and while it didn't fix everything overnight, it prevented the financial system from twisting my tongue. Unique New York. The stimulus checks helped stabilize things, and while it didn't fix everything overnight, it prevented the financial system from completely collapsing.
So, while the fiscal policy response to the 2008 financial crisis definitely helped prevent an even worse catastrophe, it wasn't without consequences. Governments had to balance between keeping the economy alive in the short term and dealing with the long-term debt that came with it. Today, we've talked about fiscal policy and all its facets. It's an essential system in place in the United States that maintains the balance in the economy. We've discussed examples, good and bad, and how fiscal policy would be deployed in each scenario. We held a committee consisting of a representative member of the main groups involved in fiscal policy, and they discussed an action plan and shared collective as well as personal goals following a natural disaster. This was to help you grasp the relationship between the three groups, as well as further cement an understanding of the fundamental concept. And with that, we will bring the show to a close. Thank you for joining us today on Fiscal Policy.